Hi, folks. You're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the Ukraine war, and I appreciate that's what everyone's talking about. It's got blanket coverage on the mainstream media. We just need to sort of look at the pieces here. Universally, right across certainly the Western world at least, the mainstream media coverage is tightly scripted right across the West. Like you switch on, the TV or look at the TV in Britain, in Australia, Canada, the United States, New Zealand. It really doesn't matter. Wherever you go in Western Europe, wherever you go, the coverage is exactly the same. It's the same central script, the same talking points. So clearly it's propaganda. And it's got the usual sort of propaganda spin attached. Little girl with mother dressed in pink who would have grown up to be a lesbian, by the way. And if you've got a problem with that, you're Hitler. Is being killed. Putin personally shooting civilians, all of them little girls, all of them dressed in pink, all of them babies, and so on and on and on. Now, the propaganda is insane. Putin's met his match. Bikini models and swimsuit models from Ukraine are personally taking out regiments of tanks with their bare hands. And you dispute that? You puppet of Putin? You Hitler? You Nazi? You fascist? So the coverage is beyond absurd. But because they can do it wall to wall and blanket coverage, then they can get away with no one's really calling them out. And the globalists have not only control of all Western governments, there's no sovereign government left in the West, but they also have control of pretty much the entire media spectrum, with a couple of smaller outliers. There's a bit of dissent on GB News, a few people on Fox News in the United States, and of course, some online commentators, such as myself and others that mention it. But really, 95% of the media is regurgitating the globalist talking points. I think the globalists did about everything they could, short of giving Putin a written invitation. They did everything they could to provoke this conflict. Now, they used, ruthlessly, in my view, used Ukraine to bait and antagonize and annoy Putin. And you'll notice in the build-up to the commencement of military hostilities, in the build-up, there was a big propaganda push in Ukraine saying that gay, lesbian people have got new rights. The rainbow flag was everywhere. Even crazy propaganda pieces, again, all globalist scripted. Skateboarders have found safe and inclusive spaces. Intolerant Ukraine, not like that bad Putin. No, he's evil. Good Ukraine, because it's got safe spaces for transgenders. So there was a big push of gay, lesbian, transgender, feminist propaganda before before the commencement of military hostilities. Now, this suggests a very carefully coordinated arrangement here. Now, if we can provoke Putin, if we can get him to do this, then maybe we can then get universal, all the non-sovereign governments of the West that are all controlled by the globalists are all going to gang up on Putin, and he's going to be removed, or the government will collapse, or the economy will collapse, and then we can bring Russia into the globalization sphere. We can have another state that's globalized. And this is very important to them, and it outrages the globalists that they haven't been able to get Putin to come into the globalist camp. And this is clearly what they want. And they're prepared to accept any amount of collateral damage in doing it. And if thousands of Ukrainians or Russians or anyone else for that matter dies in the process, then who cares? It's in a good cause. Globalization is a good cause. And if you've got a problem with it, you fascist Nazi Hitler. So I think it's all been set up. I think it's all been choreographed and set up, as indeed is the script that we hear all across the media at the moment. Now, some of the media coverage is just beyond insane. Stage managed set pieces of theatre that are just absurd and ridiculous. Now, My view at the moment is that uh, the Russians are moving, reasonably cautiously and carefully. They don't want a lot of casualties. They don't want a lot of collateral damage inside Ukraine. It's going to be expensive to fix and difficult and that sort of thing. So that they rather just get what they want, which is the autonomy of those eastern provinces in the Donbass basin there, and to have Ukraine as a completely neutral country, but maybe with a government that at least is on favourable terms with Russia. And I think that's all they want. That's at least my understanding. Now, by constantly talking up Ukraine, like inviting Zelensky to address the Congress with a with a speech that was written for him by the globalists, the very people that provoked the whole conflict to begin with, they're then trying to gin up the Ukrainians and Zelensky, who's a former stand-up comedian, by the way. I mean, Jesus Christ. I mean, him and Justin Trudeau should go off and run a country together. So Trudeau can have his socks and Zelensky can tell jokes, maybe. But the idea that he's be invited to address Congress with a prepared, globalist, scripted, rehearsed speech. I mean, how many hours did he spend in front of the camera practicing that with globalist spin meisters, giving him points about have this expression now look this, now do that, because he's not a polished media performer in the Western sense. So they got him doing it. So this gives the Ukrainians and maybe Zelensky himself is resisting or dragging his feet in negotiations with the Russians, when really he should be rushing to the table to get it all done and get it out the way. The Russian demands, as I understand at least, are not unreasonable, and would bring, in the foreseeable future at least, peace and stability. And if Putin will sign up for no more aggression and that sort of stuff, then maybe that's something to consider as well. So let's have a look at the warfare, though, the idea of warfare. This no-fly zone that some brain-dead hack American Congress men and women are asking for, without even having any concept of what it means or what it might entail or what subsequent knock-on effect it might have. This no-fly zone, and let's send billions of dollars worth of weapons. Ukraine's borders are sacrosanct. American borders? Hey, there's no borders in the world. America has no borders. But Ukraine's borders? Well, now they're worth dying for. I mean, what a load of crap, seriously. But the Ukraine conflict, they're encouraging the Ukraine to stay with it when really they should be talking about an exit strategy that allows sort of everyone to kind of keep safe face and that sort of stuff. But they're not doing that. They're ginning it up as much as they can. I mean, the idea of American jets with American pilots or NATO pilots going and shooting down Russian jets, that's extremely provocative, in my view, quite unnecessary, given the stakes and given the situation there. Again, it's being done purely to try and nuke, or not nuke, I better use not, use that, trying to completely undermine and crash the Russian economy, and then they can be brought into the globalist fold. That's really the ultimate objective here. Nothing else matters. That's the only objective that the globalists are pursuing, and all this is a charade to make that happen. But coming to the issue of warfare, the technology of warfare, changes over time, and I think we're in the middle of really one of the big technological changes in warfare today, and it comes from a number of areas. One is the ability through cyberspace to knock out pretty much the entire infrastructure of a nation. The second is the use of attacking satellites in orbit to knock out the communications and the GPS and all the stuff in orbit there. And the Chinese are doing a lot of work on that, among others. So then there's the issue of major capital equipment. Now, let's take, for example, the capital battleships. So the main battleship, or the dreadnought battleship, as an example. Now, the dreadnought class battleship came out, I think it was in the early 1900s, around 1905 to 1908, around there. And it was, and if you wanted to be a major international power player, you had to have a fleet of dreadnought battleships, or you just weren't in the game. You were just a nobody. You had to have that, and they were horrendously expensive and very advanced technology at the time. So there's really only a few countries that could build it. Maybe four or five countries in the world that were able to build them at the time. So only two really that were able to build, absolute first-rate dreadnought battleships with heavy, the heavy guns and the quality munitions and so on. That was Britain and Germany, or Germany maybe a couple of years later, but really Britain and Germany during that time. America later on. So the dreadnought class battleships were really it. But then came the technology of the submarine, and the submarine could be built for far less money than a dreadnought battleship could. And so the submarine could take out a dreadnought battleship with a couple of torpedoes, and so for cheaply in overall military expenditure terms, the submarine could take out. So that required then a major response in battle fleet sort of tactics. So what the battle fleets needed then was a convoy of smaller vessels that would be sort of within a few miles either side of the main vessel, and they would be spotting and looking for submarines, and then because I say a torpedo back in those days could travel at 25, 30 knots, that sort of thing. And so the battleship could if it cranked up its engines, could go faster than that. So it would make it very difficult. As soon as a torpedo was spotted, they could hit the hit the accelerator, as it were. Hit the fast forward, and they could get out of trouble. But and so the whole battle tactics, or concept of battle tactics, and the theory of deployment and so on had to change, because there was a change in weaponry and the technology used by that new weaponry. Then came the aircraft. Now this was again a major change in warfare, because capital battleships then needed not only the support of smaller vessels to defend against submarines, or even other torpedo boats for that matter, but they also needed then aircraft carriers to bring aircraft along so they could have air support and air protection. So really a fleet of battleships without smaller escort supports, and without an aircraft carrier or even multiple aircraft carriers, it was very vulnerable to attack. And this was seen off the coast of Malaysia during World War II, where two of Britain's most advanced dreadnought, past dreadnought then, but most advanced technology battleships of the day were taken out by a couple of Japanese bombers. So they're that exposed, and they're frantically zigzagging and using anti-aircraft machine guns on board and so on. But they still succumbed to bombs and were knocked out of action, or sunk for that matter. So technology is always changing, and not just upgrades of existing technology, like a tank, for example, may be upgraded with nighttime sights, or it may be upgraded with better radar or better detection when it's being in turn detected by laser finding devices and so on. So I'm talking about quantum changes in not only the technology supplied to the battlefield, but the technology and how it has to provoke a complete rethink of military strategy on the ground. Now, if you really want to completely do a blanket invasion of a place, boots on the ground is still the game. But if we look at the ability of, again, in cyberspace, you can take out the entire infrastructure, you can take out satellites, and the next thing is you're being attacked by, for example, tank columns or aircraft, whatever it is, to swarm those attackers with drones. Now, drones are much cheaper than some of these tanks cost millions. The jets cost gazillions, and surface vessels bristling with weaponry, they cost gazillions, and on it goes. But the ability to blunt, if not neutralize, an attack, or the main thrust of it, using drones is now a realistic technology, and will it completely change the battlefield and the conduct and the military strategy, the military theory and all this sort of thing? I think it will. I think those things in combination will. And defense against them, of course, is defense against cyber attacks, for example, is already well along. Defense against satellites that attack other satellites is similarly all the way along. So there's a lot of measures and countermeasures, but I think the drone swarming thing will be, along with cyber attacks, is going to be one of the big potential least battlefield things. Not simply because a drone can come up and launch a missile, for example, but it means that your combatants aren't on the front line. Your combatants can be squirreled away wherever in some secure location and can still operate these offensive and defensive weapons. It's not like you got a bunch of guys in a tank and they get taken out and they're all dead. That's it. The tank's useless. It can't do anything from that point onwards. Whereas no matter how many drones are knocked out, the operators of the drones are still in a position where they can then launch another wave, and so on. They're still in the sea. They've also learned a lesson. If drone A gets knocked out, they go, gee whiz, I shouldn't have turned left there. I shouldn't have done. And then that becomes continuity of experience and application of military theory to continue the attack. And I think this is going to be material. So the very idea of a large conventional army, not that it's misplaced, it's not. It still has its place, but how it's applied to send tanks out, a column of tanks, for example, it's going to need air support and it's going to need drone support. It's going to need a whole lot of ancillary support before you can make it effective. And if you can't do that, unless it's a complete surprise attack, you come bursting out of the forest or something, unless you can do that, then tanks are going to be wasted. You might as well just set fire to them yourself. You're going to have it will be necessary for the proper support. Now, throughout history, this has occurred in every technological development of warfare. The cannon, for example, was a huge shake-up, gunpowder in the cannon when it was the trebuchet, hurling, using like catapult things to hurl, big rocks against defensive positions. And they only had a range of maybe, 200, 220 yards, something around there. But that was about just outside of the range of an expert longbowman or archer. So they could pretty much operate with impunity yet cause great damage, which is always the desirable thing. Now they're very heavy and difficult to move back in the day, so often they were built on site, and that would take time. Bands of dudes would come out of the castle at night, set fire to it. There's all sorts of toing and froing, but that was a huge thing. The crossbow was a huge change in technology. Here you had a crossbow bolt that could penetrate the thickest armor of the most expensive knights. Now, knights were expensive to put on the ground. They've got these big horses which are expensive to look after. They've got a shitload of metallurgy around them, the armor, and a fair bit of training and all this sort of stuff. And yet they can be taken out by a minimally trained guy with one crossbow bolt. And this created such a furor in Europe at the time that you even had people like the Pope jumping in saying it's an inhuman weapon and shouldn't be allowed, and so on. The nuclear bomb, of course. Nuclear bomb didn't change a lot of things in the sense that it was a part of a negotiating chip. Each side threatening the other with what we're going to nuclear. But again, nobody wanted to push the button, and reasonably so, given the first time they were used. So it didn't change sort of military practice and application in theory on the ground, but it did, of course, have a huge effect on the geopolitics of the globe, and justifiably so. So every time we see a jump in material changing technology, we also see a corresponding change in battle tactics and applications. I think we're seeing that now. Now, will World War III end up in? Will we end up in World War III with Ukraine? I don't know. No, I don't think so, by the way. But the globalists are utterly determined to crush all opposition to globalization. and they're becoming very, very reckless. They're reckless with provoking war with Russia, reckless in tearing up the Constitution, reckless in dispensing with due legal process and the rule of law. They're reckless in almost every area. The barrage of lies we get 24/7 in the mainstream media, that's yet another example of the recklessness of the globalists as they destroy everything in their quest to have the whole world running to the globalization script. You've been with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.